So since Hang and I both went over a little bit, and since we want to be able to spend the bulk of our time together focusing on the issues, we are going to forgo lengthy descriptions of the panelists' many accomplishments. You have their titles up there. I'll introduce them all right now. To our far right, we have Ambassador Derek Mitchell, who also has served as the president of the National Endowment for Democracy. We also have Professor Tom Christensen, professor here at Columbia, one of the world's leading China scholars. And we are also thrilled to have Ayumi Teraoka, who is here this year both as a postdoctoral fellow at the Weatherhead East Asian Institute and works with Tom at the China in the World program. So at this point, Derek, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. You can hear me? Yes, I can hear myself coming out of here. Good morning to everybody here. I don't know where people may be seeing us on streaming, so afternoon, evening for those of us who are watching through the streaming. It's my pleasure to be back here at Columbia. I was here just in November, December for Ayumi's conference. And it's particularly a pleasure to be in a room that celebrates journalism in a time where, as Anne-Marie said, journalism is under attack, including my wife, who was executive editor at Radio Free Asia and has been working under U.S. AGM. Being in the spot where the Pulitzer, I guess, is announced, the Pulitzer Prizes, is really an honor to be here at Columbia, in the front lines of the barricades, as it were, here at Columbia University. A lot of what I wanted to go over was covered by Anne-Marie in terms of what the Trump administration's policy towards Southeast Asia may look like. I want to give sort of a very kind of 40,000-foot view of the general outlines of what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing from some of the folks within the administration to sort of draw inside the lines a little bit. And through the conversation, the Q&A, hopefully we can talk a little bit further about things. I imagine everybody here, wherever you are in the United States or abroad, are following here what's happening here quite closely, and you have your own views. Either you have to be an interminable optimist or a pessimist or a realist or a depressive to kind of get through the daily headlines and to understand what's going on. But as suggested, the administration talks about being disruptive. I think a lot of this, that's probably it's a kind way of talking about what they're doing. That gives a sense that there is a thought through idea, a very thought through vision of what they're seeking to achieve, vice an impulsive approach. I think there's also been a theory that there's sort of three schools within the Republican Party right now. And two of them in particular are within this administration, I would say. There's but there are three altogether that people postulate. So I want to sort of go through those very quickly. The first are what are called, maybe you've heard this, the primacists. They're sort of the Reagan Republicans, the people that believe the United States should increase its military budget. We should be supporting Ukraine. We should be continuing our global responsibilities, and are quite anti-China in their perspective, and see China, and also anti-Russia, I would suggest. We're in this great power competition globally. They're called the primacists. We need to keep American primacy globally. The second school are called so-called restrainers. And the restrainers are those who have a sense that we need to limit our global commitments, political and military. They tend to be skeptical about alliances, and they see them as entangling us into being the world's policeman. We have too many responsibilities globally. And we should focus really everything on the American homeland and anything that directly impacts the American homeland. So that's number two, the restrainers. We need to act with restraint. Some might call that the retreat. Some call it the surrender caucus. Just give up on things and come home. But it's viewed as kind of restraint. We need to come back and take care of ourselves first and foremost. And the third are the prioritizers. They're the ones sort of in the middle that say, we need to prioritize Asia over Europe. We need to balance. It's sort of a mix of the two, of restraint and primacy. Move the focus from Europe and the Middle East to Asia due to our limited resources and need to deal with China. So China, China, China is the way they view things. We need to rebalance our approach. And there's sort of the hyper Asia pivot types. But I think what you're going to see, there's a lot of talk, mostly these two, the restrainers and prioritizers are in conversation. I think there's not a singular, Trump is going to be the one in his incoherent way to kind of weigh in. I think he is more of a restrainer by instinct, but depends where he focuses. That's where he may wake up that day. I think there's going to be we have to get used to a bit of incoherence in the policy that we see over time. And debates within, and maybe individuals going out and doing different things. Asia may be slightly different. We can talk about that in a moment, but you're going to see a bit overall in the global perspective. I think some get used to incoherence and kind of lack of coordination. Now, what we do know about Trump, though, his instincts, as we talk about where his instincts might be, I think Anne-Marie went through that. I think you all understand these things. Economic relationships, they're not about mutual benefit. They're about leverage. They're a point of leverage on others or a point of grievance, a sense of others taking advantage of us. He thinks like a businessman where, it's maximizing foreign policy is about maximizing economic value. And there's a little sort of understanding of that in the context of a grand strategy. How do you integrate economic policy with military policy, with political engagement? There's an instinct from him that it's about the bottom line, economic value, and the notion of strategic alliances based on shared values, shared interests that are strategic force multipliers does not compute in that mindset. There's a focus on hard power. You talk about the destruction of RFA or VOA, the attempted kind of takedown of those so-called soft power tools. I think it just doesn't compute. And I think part of it could be the name. It's not necessarily the name. I don't think they think of that, but anything that, these idea that real men and women who love them don't think in terms of soft. Nothing's soft. It's got to be, you got to do things that are hard, military, do things that are forceful. So no appreciation of attraction, norm building, and things that are, they're not about fear and about coercion. At the same time, I should say, and we talk about prizes, there's a curious interest that President Trump has in the Nobel Peace Prize. So you get this sense he wants to avoid World War II, he talks about, avoiding conflict. Even amidst this hard power and coercion and all the rest, I think he thinks in terms of economics, he may think in other terms as well, in terms of we have to avoid conflict, which gives a sense of uncertainty of just how far he might take that. But he loves to get awards and honors and be in control, want to be the hero of the story, which gives also a sense of uncertainty and unpredictability. As Anne-Marie said, though, there's so far very little focus on Asia, let alone Southeast Asia. They talk about this as happening the second half of the year, is what I hear from the White House. We'll focus on that. It's mostly not just America first, but America's first. So you hear about Greenland and Panama. That's the instinct again of President Trump. But within the administration, there is, interestingly, at senior levels, many Asianists and many of the Asia firsters, many of the prioritizers are in senior positions. You don't have to go through the names. But these folks have Korea specialization. They have Taiwan. They see things in terms of Taiwan. And when they think of Asia, they think of China, China, China. It's all about China. Everything's a function of how do we deal with China. Southeast Asia is viewed, how do we deal, in these minds, prioritizers, how do we deal with the rise of China, of constraining China? So, you're seeing in the first several months some things that are fairly reassuring in the focus, if left to Rubio to just do what he does. We'll see what happens with the trip right now that Hegseth has to the region, and focusing not on the problems here with Hegseth and the signal issue, but we'll see. I suspect he's going to be in the Philippines tomorrow. Rubio had some very positive meetings with the foreign minister in February and reassuring them on commitment to the Mutual Defense Treaty, very standard type of foreign policy, extending on the Biden administration policy. And in fact, people in the White House say we were pretty comfortable with the Biden administration approach. Maybe, if anything, they want to be a little tougher. Everything has to be tough and harder, but they're overall comfortable with the strengthening of alliances, backing up, and giving the $400 million, releasing that for military assistance to the Philippines. And we'll see. With Hegseth, he may go out there with that mindset of China, 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 hit his marks, read his talking points, reassure. In fact, he's going to Guam and Hawaii and Japan are all the right places you want to see early on. So again, at a certain level, you may want to see some reassurance that, we want to focus on China or focus on Asia. The question is how they focus on Asia and then what what that means for the relationships with others if it's all about China, China, China. Just to get to, and I do want to stop, I don't want to go on too long because we do want to have a conversation, but U.S. credibility in Asia traditionally stands on two legs, and it's trade and security. As Anne-Marie suggested, on the political side, it's about showing respect because, America is far away. Do you understand us? Are you showing up for the meetings? Are you paying respect for the ASEAN way? These days, I wonder how much ASEAN really wants America to show up at those things. We've seen what happens when senior American leaders show up at Munich or in Europe. What they say may not be what the region wants to hear. So you'll hear, I'm sure today, a lot of talk about, well, maybe if we don't want the eye being focused on us, hopefully we just let us be and they do limited work with us. But so that's a balance of what the region seeks from us and how much American engagement is actually going to be good for the region in reassuring versus otherwise. But I suspect it will be focused on bilateral relations like the Biden folks did, less on the collective ASEAN. And this issue of democracy, human rights, probably welcome to the governments of Southeast Asia, if not the people. And it may help some of the relationships. But on trade and tariffs, you all know what's coming. We have April 2nd coming. You have the one thing that, excuse me, this happens in the morning. I have phlegm in the morning. That the one thing that Trump believes in viscerally is tariffs. This is something I think he believes in as a matter of faith. So what might he do in a region where there's a $250 billion trade surplus and where there's, in Vietnam, there's a big, $125 billion goods deficit. I mean, this is where the attention can be quite damaging. And again, where the economics are not connected. There's no friend shoring because in Trump's mind, there are no friends. There are only economic adversaries or zero-sum attitudes towards economic partners. And like we always say about China talks win-win, but think zero-sum. Their economic engagement is as much about getting leverage on others that you can use later. And there's a concern that our friends, our partners who we have good trade relations with, can be on the shooting edge, as we were, of a trade war or a tariff war and what that does to the relationship. But on the security side, as I said, there are some things that are positive so far, but the problem in Southeast Asia, Southeast Asian, they'll tell you, exalt predictability, sustainability, and thus credibility of the U.S. commitment as an offshore balancer. And when they, I think the concern finally there are two sort of wild cards here through all this. One is with this China, China, China mindset. There are folks within the administration very explicit about we are going to ask the region to choose. You're going to choose between us, the U.S. or China. What does that mean in practice? We'll have to see, but it could be everything from choosing on weapon sales, choosing on infrastructure investments. You're going to do Huawei, that's going to be a real problem for us. You hear that explicitly. You have an infrastructure like that's that vulnerable. I don't know how we can have the kind of defense relations or that same type of relationship. So there's very much a sense that we're going to have to choose. And their feeling is, again, this idea of hard power and fear works, is where they're going to go. That Southeast Asia, well, you have, you need us if you're offshore balancer. That's a real politique kind of attitude that you have towards us. It's never been based necessarily on love and affection. It's based on hard interest. And there's a floor beyond which you want to go with the United States because you need us. You don't trust China. Therefore, you will want to, the fear of the U.S. and hard power of the U.S. or conversion will work. And there's frustration about this free ridership that you hear in Europe. We need ASEAN, Southeast Asia to step up. And that this double standard between the U.S. and the PRC, where And it would be annoying to me too sometimes. The Southeast Asians can bash America because you know we can take it, while you very, very soft on China. You just tiptoe around China because China will hurt you, but you can get away with it, the United States. So like, forget that. We don't want that anymore. You gotta really step up. So that's one big question mark and a kind of question comes. The second, of course, finally, is the Trump factor. And this issue of, I think, as Anne-Marie sort of alluded to, with his idea of trade and economics at the center, avoiding World War III, he's sending signals about, well, we don't like nuclear war. We gotta work with Russia. China's listening to all of that. And then what does that mean for this, what we've talked about, and a lot of people in the Asia field worry about this grand bargain. People in Asia worry about this grand bargain. The people of Taiwan worry about this grand bargain and how that then will flow into Southeast Asia. The grand bargain would be this G2 idea that China says, look, as they have for years, you really do have a lot of burdens. We can relieve you of that. You take care of the Eastern Pacific, we'll take care of the Western Pacific, and Europe, yep, Russia can do that. Taiwan means a lot more to us than it does to you. And Korea, you've always wanted to get out of there. We'll work with that. We'll take care of your economic issues, take care of your border issues, take care of your fentanyl issues. You don't want World War III, et cetera, et cetera. Let's work together. And there are people in the United States over the past 20 years who have been interested in that G2 idea, generally, of avoiding an inevitable conflict between the United States and China. Will that then be compelling now to the president? Now, I hear from the prioritizers in the administration, they're aware of that, they're concerned of it, they're very much, I think everybody else in this administration, frankly, are thinking warily about China. They see them as the priority threat. And so they're going to be telling Trump, that will make you look weak. Don't do it. That will show weakness. That will be, which is, of course, Achilles' heel of, to be called that. But it's a big question mark of where that goes. So finally, I think the best for Southeast Asia, as we hear about, is this idea of, keeping head down. You have to get used to confusion. There's going to be confusion, incoherence, unpredictability. Asia is not as visceral to Trumpers as Europe is, which is a good thing in terms of potentially forcing some things on Asia that we see in Europe. But as we say, they are going to ask Southeast Asia and Asians to step up and be much more explicit in terms of the China challenge, which is going to cause, and it'll be interesting to hear throughout this day how Southeast Asian countries will respond to that kind of approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Tom, over to you.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. I wanted to thank Anne-Marie Murphy, who is my classmate, one of my dearest classmates here at Columbia University. I'm proud to be co-hosting with her program and with Hang. Where's Hang?
Back there.
Back there. Hi, Hang. And the Weatherhead East Asia Institute. I also wanted to give a shout out to Yu-Ting Lee. My program, China in the World, which is a co-sponsor today, has been generously supported by the Luce Foundation for the last 2 years. We wouldn't be able to operate without their support, and we really appreciate what they've done for us. I'm going to apologize up front that I have to chair a promotion committee meeting at midday, and then I have to teach my 150 students in the afternoon. So I'm not going to be with you all day, even though I am co-hosting, and I apologize for that because it looks like a great agenda that has been put together. U.S.-China relations. So I'm going to talk about U.S.-China relations and the potential impacts on Southeast Asia. And I'm going to say some things that might seem jarring and surprising, but I don't think it's clear what the Trump administration's approach to U.S.-China relations are going to be yet. I have a more dyadic take on the Trump administration than Derek's triadic one. And I see in the economic sphere, I could imagine a push for real decoupling of the U.S. and China economies. I think there are certain people in the administration who would like to see that outcome, as much decoupling as possible. I think other people want to use things like tariffs as leverage to get a better deal with China, to remove some of the very real barriers that are there between the U.S. and Chinese economies. And the who wins that debate will be very consequential for Southeast Asia, I would argue. The second is, I have, again, a more dyadic approach. The strategic competitors, I think they are the prioritizers, you call them?
Mm-hmm.
The ones that really want a strategic competition with China, want to execute that strategic competition with China, and those who want a kind of grand bargain. Derek called them restrainers. I don't think they're fully restrainers in that I see them more as kind of 19th century sphere of influence thinkers. They're not restrained in that they want to get Greenland. They're not restrained in that they want to get Canada. I say that, I just said that out loud. They want to get Canada because they want to have a sphere of influence for the United States in this hemisphere. Those types of people are the types of people who are comfortable with giving big chunks of Ukraine to Russia, and they may be comfortable with giving Taiwan and other interests in the Southeast Asia region to China. So strangely, Southeast Asians who were very nervous in the first Trump administration about the competitive energies of the United States towards China should probably be looking to support the strategic competitors in the administration, because the Southeast Asian states don't want to be forced to choose. Our mutual classmate, Jonathan Stromseth, wrote a very good report and book about this topic, saying Southeast Asians don't want to choose between the United States and China. And the first term Trump people really were pushing Southeast Asian states in a kind of crude way to make choices that they didn't want to make. But Southeast Asian states also don't want to be abandoned by the United States to China's bullying. So they don't want the United States to pull entirely out of the South China Sea region and let China dominate it, because the sphere of influence people say that's China's sphere of influence, do what you want. So I think the best bet for the Southeast Asian states is to support the strategic competition instincts of the Trump administration, to engage the United States in the security realm, because a United States that is competing with China in the security realm is a United States that values allies and partners and doesn't abandon them over economic issues. A United States that's competing with China puts security issues ahead of bilateral trade deficits and other economic frictions with friends and allies and potential adversaries alike. And I think that's to the advantage of Southeast Asian states. And we don't know which angle the Trump administration will prioritize in the end. I think Secretary Rubio and National Security Advisor Waltz, given their own personal histories, are strategic competitors. And they will want to build as many strong relationships in Asia as part of their competitive strategy towards China. They seem to value allies like Japan and Korea. They seem to value partners like Taiwan and Vietnam. And this would be a source of some continuity in U.S. policy towards the region going back to the Bush and Obama administrations. There are those who think bilateral trade deficits are more important. I would say Peter Navarro seems to be in that camp, and often the president himself. So I don't know whether the president will continue to push in that direction. If you want to bring U.S. manufacturing home, if that's really the goal, then that's not going to be good for Southeast Asian states. And that's not going to appeal to countries like Vietnam, Malaysia. Most U.S. allies and partners in the East Asia region, Northeast Asia and Southeast Asia, have significant trade surpluses with the United States. And if that's the standard of success or failure that's applied to countries, that's going to be damaging to the alliance and security relations with those actors. And I think that if we press really hard on bilateral economic issues with friends and non-friends alike, we're going to lose our greatest source of leverage in the U.S.-China strategic competition, which I think is real, and that is allies and partners. The United States has 60 plus allies and partners around the world. China's got a kind of rogues gallery of states that are that's close to Russia, North Korea, Iran, Zimbabwe, the junta in Burma. These are not big strength multipliers, with the possible exception of Russia. And the United States has this very strong hand because of the alliances and partnerships that we've built up. And to scrap that over bilateral trade deficits seems like a poor approach. And I think we're seeing it this week. We just raised 25% tariffs on cars, foreign cars, and that's a lot of our allies who are producing those foreign cars. The Biden administration had real accomplishments in building alliances and partnerships in Asia and Europe, and building links between Asia and Europe, which was quite notable. In Asia, there was the U.S., Japan, Korea triangular relationship for the first time institutionalized. Having been a senior official in the East Asia Pacific Affairs Bureau in the Bush administration, this is something we always wanted. We always wanted to get Japan, Korea, and the United States together on strategic issues. It's just very difficult because Japan and Korea tend not to get along in a persistent way. So that was a real accomplishment. Increased cooperation with the Philippines, which is really important to U.S. military strategy now, which is pushing for a more distributed, mobile approach to the region because fixed bases are so vulnerable to strike weapons. You need access to new places. Access to new places is controversial in those places. So you need good relations with the capitals of these countries to execute that policy. And we have better relations with the Philippines now on this score than we have in the past. Will that be maintained? It takes work to maintain these relationships. As Ambassador Mitchell, my friend Derek, knows, it takes work. It doesn't just happen. You have to focus on it, right? And here I want to focus on Vietnam. Vietnam is not an ally. It probably never will be an ally under its current government of the United States, but it is a security partner in the maritime realm, and the Biden administration made improvements in that security relationship. So did Japan make improvements in the security relationship with Vietnam. And most notably, and not it's notable, but it isn't noted, is Korea. Korea has made real inroads with Vietnam in the security realm, particularly in the maritime sphere. This is all very good. The problem is if economics can get in the way of that. So predictably, not only predictably, but predicted, because I predicted it, when the United States raised the first rounds of tariffs on China that were sustained through the Biden administration, many companies, not just Chinese companies, but third country companies, moved their final operations into other countries for final production so that they wouldn't be subjected to tariffs. Some of this was happening already because of labor prices and other reasons, but it was accelerated greatly in 2018. You can look at the graphs. Mexico, Vietnam, they become the endpoint production for companies. And Vietnam's trade surplus with the United States, predictably and predicted, therefore skyrockets up to the 125 billion that Derek talks about. So Vietnam's now the third biggest trade surplus with the United States, or the biggest trade deficit of the United States with a country. That's a bad thing now. So if we put tariffs on Vietnam because it has a big trade surplus, who gets hurt? Korea, Japan, Vietnam, our allies and partners. Do some Chinese companies get hurt too? Yes, right? But there's a lot of collateral damage to our friendly relations. Samsung used to make its phones in China. The vast majority of Samsung cell phones, a lot of you have them, are made in Vietnam. Vast majority. So you're hurting Korea if you put high tariffs on Vietnam. In the first term of the Trump administration, there was a kind of ham-fisted approach to Southeast Asia. You have to choose. Make a choice. You know, you don't really have the room to play this hedging game that you want to play. And one of the things that the United States did was they sent high-level officials to capitals. And I did research in 2019 in Southeast Asia, and they would say, "You are a victim of debt trap diplomacy," an inaccurate term, by the way, about China's foreign economic policy. It's an inaccurate term, and you are a victim of predatory economic policy. Whether accurate or not very diplomatic to go into post-colonial nationalist countries and say to their leaders they are victims of predatory economic policies, because what you're saying to them is you are prey, you are a dupe. You took this loan and you are stupid. Surprisingly, I'm sarcastically, unsurprisingly, this didn't go over very well in Indonesia and Malaysia. And China was actually being treated with some suspicion at the time. And the United States managed to annoy these capitals more than the Chinese, which was not to the U.S. competitive advantage. So my interlocutors pointed out things like, we asked for the loans. So if it's predatory, that means we asked to be preyed upon. That's not true. And they pointed to projects like the Bandung-Jakarta Railway, and they said, we wanted this railway. And they said, look at Japan. And what they said to me is, you Americans should look at Japan. They do it right. They don't complain about the Chinese investments. They make their own investments. And look at the Jakarta subway system. Pretty good. So compete with China by doing something. Don't complain about what China's doing. That was the argument. So I hope that we could do that. And to the Trump administration's credit, they did create this $60 billion fund called the Build Act. And they did create this thing called the Blue Dot Network, which was a multilateral organization created in the Trump first term. It's really amazing, right? Multilateral. And it was creating standards for judging development loans as, are they transparent? Are they recoverable? Are they sustainable? So that's not a bad idea, but maybe they can go back to that. But it doesn't seem like this version of the administration is going to be involved in this kind of multilateral cooperation. But it was a very small thing, $60 billion compared to all the other money that was pouring into the region. America first, economic protectionism and U.S. diplomacy. The tariffs in the region are not going to be popular for obvious reasons. The cutoff of USAID money to places like Indonesia is a giant own goal of the United States from a strategic perspective. And then there are sins of omission. And what a lot of people don't realize, because the United States doesn't play it up, is the United States is a major economic player in Southeast Asia, a much bigger economic player than most people know. That's because they focus on bilateral trade, and they say China's the biggest bilateral trade partner of the various actors in the region. But private U.S. firms invest very heavily in Southeast Asia and have a much bigger investment portfolio in Southeast Asia than China does. The problem is U.S. diplomacy doesn't play this up. And I think the Singapore embassy has been doing this over the last year or two. I visited there last year. They're trying to play up this idea that we're here. We're actually making a big difference in the lives of Southeast Asians through our investments. But it's unusual for American diplomats to do that. And I think part of the problem is in the United States itself, that foreign direct investment should be a source of pride for the United States abroad. But there's such a big push for deglobalization in American domestic politics. Foreign direct investment is what, from this perspective? It's exporting jobs. And I think that that's unfortunate. I don't think that's an accurate economic analysis of globalization or U.S. foreign direct investment, but it's something that political people steer clear of now in the current protectionist environment in the United States. And that puts the United States at disadvantage. And I don't know if the Trump 2.0 administration is capable of playing up the importance of U.S. private investment in Singapore, Vietnam, Thailand as a source of influence in those regions. And they ought to, but I don't know if they'll be capable of that. The last thing is about the Philippines. I do a lot of work in Washington. I've done a lot of work at the State Department, done a lot of work at the Pentagon. The Philippines is really important to the United States' future military posture in East Asia. The government in the Philippines for the last few years has been very supportive of the U.S.-Philippine alliance. It's not uncontroversial in Philippine politics. It's going to take work to maintain it, and I hope that we do, because I think it creates a stronger U.S. presence in the region, which I think is a good thing for the region. And I don't think abandoning the region along the lines of the restrainers or the what Derek calls the restrainers, what I would call the 19th century sphere of influence thinkers, is a good strategy for the United States over the long run. If you say, are you interested in American interests? I say, yes, I am, but I don't agree with the America First optic on how to preserve U.S. interests. I think it's more complicated than that. And the last thing, the place where we've really gotten hurt, and Derek alluded to this, where U.S. relations in the region have really been hurt is the war in Gaza, in Indonesia and Malaysia, in Singapore. I went to Singapore twice last year, and people said for the first time, foreign policy is becoming a domestic issue. foreign policy with the United States because of the significant Muslim population in Singapore. It's a little frustrating to me, I'll say, as an American, because when I was in Malaysia and Indonesia in 2019, I was really struck at how there wasn't a single peep about the giant re-education camps in Xinjiang. Not a single peep. And I would talk about it at universities. There was visible embarrassment in the audience that there wasn't a single peep about this because economic interests were important. And if you criticize China on Xinjiang, you're going to get whacked, right? That was the argument, right? But why can they criticize the United States for its defense support of Israel and Israel using that defense support in ways that they don't like? Because they know the United States is not going to smack them for criticizing the United States. Maybe that has changed. I don't know. Maybe countries are going to start getting tariffs on them if they criticize the United States on humanitarian grounds. I don't know. But I think that's the reason the United States gets so much criticism for Guantanamo, so much criticism for Gaza, and China does not get criticized for putting 1 million Uyghurs in re-education camps in 2018 and 2019. And it's disturbing. So I'll just leave it there.
Okay, thank you very much. So we're going to shift from China to Japan. Ayumi?
Great. Thank you, Anne-Marie, for bringing us together, bringing all the great scholars from the region. It's also very good to be reconnected with some friends like Greg Poling from CSIS after years. So I am tasked to talk about the state of U.S.-Japan relations and prospects for the relationship and its implications for Southeast Asia. The relationship has gotten off to what it looks to be a stable, positive one. All the right messages have been issued from the successful Ishiba-Trump summit. Right people are in NSC working on Asia. And as Ambassador Mitchell has noted, those people are doing their job while kind of avoiding the political attention or spotlight from the media. So that's good. When the good people are doing their job and not in the spotlight of the media attention, that usually leads to substantial policy making. So that's, I think, a good sign. And then in this political climate, the fact that joint statement between Japan and U.S. had all the right messages in the document and had a stamp from the president, I think means a lot because, everybody in the administration knows this is what President Trump endorsed. So I would just talk about what was in the joint statement and what Japan was trying to do through that summit. Prime Minister Ishiba was the second leader to visit White House, and that's the same order that Abe visited Trump. Ishiba was after Netanyahu, Abe was after Theresa May. And that order of foreign visitors in White House were well calibrated in advance. And then so far from the Indo-Pacific, it's only Japan and India who are able to send leaders into the White House. So the significance of the joint statement and summit meeting were, I think, pretty significant. I mean, the prevalent for the region, because what Japan was trying to do through that summit was not just about securing commitment from the United States to the bilateral security of U.S.-Japan, but also really secure U.S. commitment to the region and also stability and peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. And Japan really got all those messages in the joint statement, even more than I think people were expecting. So President Trump really stamped on those messages. And some of the messages like on Taiwan, I think they went beyond the previous U.S.-Japan joint statement, kind of criticizing use of coercion or use of force against Taiwan. On the Indo-Pacific, they also criticized provocations in the South China Sea. So that's where the Philippines is probably implicitly thought about in the bilateral sense. And when they talked about Indo-Pacific region, they also got a sort of endorsement from the Trump people to continue on the various multilateral frameworks that Biden administration was working on that Professor Christensen was just highlighting. previous administration, Biden administration, was trying to cast this, series of multilateral, unilateral frameworks as sort of a part of lattice work. That's a label that they wanted to put on. But again, those continuous relationships that were built in Asia, strengthening of bilateral relationship among U.S. allies and partners have begun back in 2000s, early 2000s, and some going back to 1990s. So those ties are very strong, and I'm glad that those ties or, lattice work framework was not politicized to be kind of monopolized by the Biden people. And then Trump administration also put a stamp that, we will continue these bilateral and trilateral frameworks and also quadrilateral frameworks among India, Japan, US, and Australia. And additionally, even in the context of Indo-Pacific, they talked about US-Japan ROK, and that was significant. Just because Koreans have their own domestic turmoil right now, so they can't really send their leader to engage with President Trump. In that sense, the fact that North Korea was on the table in the joint statement and the US-Japan ROK trilateral summit was highlighted as a mechanism not to just confront the North Korean challenges, but also for the regional stability, was a sign of a continuity from Camp David summit among President Yoon, President Biden, and Prime Minister Kishida. So there are a lot of goods in there in the joint statement, and that being out of the way, Japan was able to now focus on Asia. Because having the bilateral relationship in a stable place leads Japan to focus more on Asia, Southeast Asia, the key battleground for US-China geopolitical competition, but also this region means a lot to Japan, and Japan is a part of the region. So Prime Minister Ishiba has already visited Malaysia and Indonesia, and reportedly he's going to go to Vietnam and the Philippines over the Golden Week, which is the first week of May. Japan has developed this mechanism, a framework called the Official Security Assistance, and that's a different mechanism from official development aid. Official Security Assistance was developed under Kishida, and that was a way for Japan to provide weapons and radars and all those assets on a strategic dimension to Southeast Asia for free. And this budget was only 2 billion yen in 2023, and now it's going to expand into 8 billion, so it's quadrupled. And the targets or receivers of this aid will also expand into 9 countries. And this is significant because I think Japan does see this kind of window of opportunity that Japan has to really step up also on the security dimensions, not just FDI, not just a sort of development aid, but also on the security. So as part of the package, Japan has provided radars, patrol vessels, rescue boats to Malaysia, Philippines, various others. And I think Japan will continue to do that. And I think not just Japan, I think India is now showing more interest in selling weapons to the region. Australia has always been a key actor with strong ties with Indonesia. I do see that Southeast Asia region to be multilateral region from the beginning. So it is a battleground for US-China competition, but there are always other actors like Japan, India, Australia who want to play big roles in this region. And once Korea gets back on, once it stabilizes politically, I think Korea should be much more active and also coordinate with other like-minded partners to actually work on this region strategically, not just for mercantilistic economic trade interests, but actually think through what the A's are doing strategically and more coordination among India, Japan, Australia, and Korea. And to think about Southeast Asia's future is critical. I don't know how much more time I have, but again, Japan-US relationship is not just flowery, right? There are many concerning signals coming from Trump administration. Tariff is definitely a one issue. Japanese government has been lobbying to get exemption of tariff. I don't think it's working. nonetheless, their job is to keep working to get some kind of tariff exemptions or to work with American automobile companies to lobby against tariff that would also hurt Japanese automobile sector. So I think that their sort of main mode of diplomacy is damage control and kind of avoid the spotlight in American domestic politics. Budget cuts at the Pentagon, the proposed budget cuts at the Pentagon are also kind of worrying, despite the fact that U.S. military has been very active in the Pacific, even the last couple of months. You know, they're doing a series of exercises in the Pacific, Guam, Hawaii, involving Australia, Japan, India in various ways. So the U.S. military presence is reassuring, but the fact that they're still talking budget cuts, and now there is more reported discussions about undoing of this idea to expand U.S. forces Japan. And this idea of expanding U.S. forces Japan was, I think, was a Japanese idea. Because on Monday, this Monday, Japanese self-defense forces just established Joint Operation Command. It's a new joint operational command that really integrates services and operations to be ready for more contingency related scenarios. And then by establishing JJOC, Japan Joint Operation Command, they are also calling for Americans to reorganize its own command and control structure to have a much upgraded U.S. Forces Japan operational headquarters in Japan so that Japan self-defense forces would also have a counterpart in Japan. So that was the direction that Japan and the U.S. were going under Biden administration. It was a kind of agreement that was announced in summer last year after a 2+2 meeting between U.S. and Japan. Now, because of the budget cuts, there is a report that now Pentagon is reviewing that decision, whether that makes sense. It's about $1.1 million of cut if they just redo it. I hope they reconsider. 1.1 billion?
Billion, okay.
Probably billion, $1 billion.
Billion is nothing.
Sorry, 1.1 billion of, so I think it's causing a lot of confusion in Tokyo, Hawaii, but now that Secretary of Defense Hexes is in Hawaii and giving a really good speeches, hitting right tones, like saying that America first is not America alone. And he's meeting Admiral Paparo in the region and meeting all the officials working on the Indo-Pacific issues. So I hope this agenda to upgrade U.S. forces Japan in Tokyo will come back and then will not be touched by the defense budget cuts. Anything else? So any bilateral tensions between U.S. and Japan will suck up diplomatic capitals in Tokyo. So I think the fact that U.S.-Japan relationship is stable is great because then it frees up the capitals for Japan to use it in the region. Once U.S. and Japan start looking at each other and confronting each other, they can't spend enough resources in Southeast Asia and other places, or even support for Ukraine and other areas that the world needs for Japanese investment. So that's the trade-off that I often see when you see more headlines of tensions between U.S.-Japan relationship. Japanese officials are forced to spend their capitals to stabilize the relationship with the most important ally. But that's a missed opportunity. If they can look toward a same goal, then allies can spend their resources to share goals and have a very clear division of labors. Because Chinese have a lot of resources, and I think we need to actually combine allies' resources to compete effectively and efficiently. Right now, there's a lot more questioning and uncertainty from U.S. policy that is still worrisome. So I will conclude my remarks here.
All right. Thank you all very much. We've certainly gotten a fascinating overview of the strategic situation within Southeast Asian countries have to navigate. I'm going to extend this panel for a few minutes and cut into our next break. I'd like to take questions from the audience. If we have them, the microphone is right there. And then I will give each one of our speakers a minute or two for final remarks or comments to their questions. Joseph, I don't know if you want to speak loudly or use the mic.
Try to speak up. I think that people can hear me.
Okay.
Thank you for the, thank you. Thank you for the presentations. I learned a lot. Just a footnote, or rather a response to a point that Tom talked about, which I'm very sympathetic towards, about how the US has undersold investments, FDI. And you're absolutely right. The United States by far has been the largest investor in Southeast Asia. Now, for a long time, that would have been, and that was a very powerful talking point and selling point. I'm not too sure under this administration. I mean, picture this. You go to Trump, you say American companies have been investing in, say, Singapore to these, at this magnitude. What are the chances that his first response is, why are they investing there and not back home? Right?
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. So I think, as you rightly pointed out, the sort of unpredictability, even changes or compels us to rethink what used to be standard talking points in the bilateral relationship.
Yeah, I agree. That's the point I was trying to make, that it's just not popular in American domestic politics. There's a reason President Trump was elected, because the tendency in American politics is to view foreign direct investment as the export of jobs. I think it's a very simplistic economic analysis of globalization and its importance, but it's a very common one in the United States. And I think unfortunately, it's shared in very high levels in the government.
The question is whether you can have different messages for different folks. If you can keep that message to Southeast Asia, not talk about it so much at home, quietly get that out there. I don't know if that's possible these days. But the other factor, though, I mean, we've always said we have much more investment in the region, but my sense is China is definitely rising, that the recent investment is much more Chinese than American. The legacy investments might be American, but that people are starting to see the Chinese presence much more than American. So the delta, I think, is balancing towards China, which is a concern for us in terms of our public diplomacy.
And I just want to flag, I've done a fair bit of interviewing with some US companies, and there's two issues. One is, do the diplomatic corps highlight US investment? But often the US private sector does not want it highlighted for all of the reasons that Tom has discussed. So there's like two different sets of actors, either one of which can lead to that not becoming a talking point for the US. Okay, other questions? Sydney?
Yeah, I have a loud voice.
It's for online, though. I think they need to hear you.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry. Thanks, Sydney Jones from NYU. I wanted to follow up on your point that the cutoff of USAID was an own goal in Indonesia and actually around the world. And there's been a fear that China could move in to at least reap the benefits of some of that own goal. To what extent is that realistic, given the nature of USAID in the region? And is this realistic to think that China could move in and provide that kind of development aid? And two, is there any realization in Washington that there are serious consequences to that cutoff? Thank you.
So I think there is recognition in Washington, D.C. That cutting off of USAID will cost the United States diplomatically in various parts of the world in a competition with China. Whether that's at the top of the Trump administration is different than Washington, D.C. China, in a sense, doesn't have to move into the space to benefit from the cutoff of USAID, because the U.S. looks bad, it gets hurt. So China benefits right away from that. I'm not sure that China wants to move into all of those spaces. They're already in those spaces in the sense that they give loans. They're giving loans to Indonesia. They're not giving aid to Indonesia. The United States was giving aid to Indonesia. It's very different. So China's there already. It can say, we're the normal power. We're reliable. We're still giving you the loans. We're still involved in the projects. We're not just pulling out of them. So we're the good guys. So they benefit from that. I don't know if they want to move into that space because they tend not to give aid. And it's misunderstood. Somehow China diplomatically has benefited from this impression in the United States and Europe that it's giving a lot of aid as part of the Belt and Road Initiative. It isn't. It's giving fairly high interest loans and expects to get paid back. The reason it's not debt trap diplomacy is they want to get paid back. They sometimes don't because they don't make great loans, but that's not because their intention at time T was to give a loan that they would never get paid back for. They're discovering that a lot of the loans are not recoverable, but it wasn't a strategy. Let's give them a loan. They won't be able to pay it back, and then we'll have leverage over them. They're settling for leverage. They want the money back. So.
Okay, so Paul, did you have a question? And then Walden, and then we're going to have to cut it off,
Yes.
unfortunately.
All right, Ambassador Mitchell, you were head of NDI. You know all too well the impact of the aid cutoff and the democracy promotion work in Southeast Asia, and with VOA and RFA gone. This is the only positive thing for these regimes that don't like the pressure from democracy promotion or from independent media sources that are pointing out the problems. Does that help in any way for the relationship with Trump in terms of they see it as like a gift to them all of a sudden? This might cause a rapprochement of some kind. I mean, Hun Sen, loved the fact that RFA is gone. And maybe this is exactly his dream from Trump 1, because he wished for very much this outcome, but didn't get it then. Now he's getting it now.
Well, I think within the kind of prioritizer community, or the people that are traditional Asia hands that want to have better relations because they're concerned about China, they absolutely see this as an opportunity to have better relations with the strong men of the region. Whether Trump has a particular affinity for those folks because of that strongman, I think he thinks in terms of bigger powers. But I think, yeah, absolutely, there's a sense of opportunity there to work more closely. And explicitly, they say this is good. RFA in Vietnam was not good for us because it just annoyed the leadership. We want a strategic relationship with Vietnam. Cambodia was of great interest, I think, to the Biden folks too. When they thought maybe there's a new opportunity with Hun Manet. You have changes of some kind. West Point, I've met him and had conversations when I was the first, I think, senior defense official back in 2011 to have a dialogue with Cambodia. And I met with Manet often then to try to test this out. So there's always been that sense of, well, we have to deal with the folks who are there, and maybe we can use that as leverage to ease on maybe move them towards a better political place, but have a better strategic relationship. This puts that all out of the way, absolutely. So yes, I think there's an opportunity there. The question is at what cost? Because again, we talk about whether it's USAID or otherwise, it's soft power. Is soft power real? Is there power in soft power? Do popular attitudes matter? For the fact that throughout the region, even in Vietnam, not on the RFA side, but on the USAID side, not underwriting anymore the work on cleanup on, Agent Orange stuff and the rest. Indonesia was huge, what we were doing on USAID. Other places huge. But even on, RFA side, the pulling the rug out from our friends who now can't trust us, who thought we were on their side on values. Are they now not going to be, looking, another reason to mistrust America, aside from Gaza and the Muslim countries? But now they have a reason not to believe in America's trustworthiness. And maybe for generations, that comes at, I think, a cost. And as I said, soft power, to me, the biggest problem with it is not the idea, it's the name, but it is real power, I think. But it's going to be tested. It's going to be tested in a whole host of ways. And the answer to the question of whether Washington, I think a lot of people do think it comes at the expense of our power, but we're not quite sure how much. It's really a test of how much, given the realpolitik aspects that also are ingrained in the region.
Okay, Walden, the next question goes to you.
Just a couple of things. In terms of U.S. capital going to Southeast Asia and to China, I think it's not at all simplistic that people down in the grassroots in the United States feel that it has contributed to deindustrialization. And because that's the way they feel about it. So, and significant amounts of capital has gone either as direct investment, say to China, or as the creation of contractors. So I would say that that is a very real feeling in the grassroots of the United States. And I don't think you can just dismiss that as a simplistic view. And the more you dismiss that as simplistic view, the more you're going to get a pushback from the Trump people.
Yes.
The second thing is it was not China that defined the saw itself and defined itself in the world as the strategic competitor and rival of the United States. As far as I know, for so long, China was trying to avoid the image that it was trying to topple the United States from being the top dog in the global hierarchy. And it always defined itself as being in a complementary relationship with the United States until the last few years, where in the last Trump and the Biden administration, it began to define itself as really an alternative to the United States. But that was because the definition of China for a long time has been from the Bush administration on as the strategic rival of the United States. So coming here and feeling this animosity as China being the strategic competitor, I think this is the kind of feeling that makes people react in a not very good way in my part of the world. And so these are just, and then of course the last thing is the Philippines, has practically outsourced under Biden its foreign and military policy to the United States. That's why this guy Marcos was so popular with the Biden administration. And the U.S., the idea that it was protecting Philippine interests, no, it was interested in building the Philippines as a containment of China. It was not going to get involved in Coast Guard conflicts. So let's get beyond this
Thanks.
benign American kind of attitude towards the Philippines, because you had a guy who was willing to outsource everything to you guys.
Okay, thanks very much. So I just respond in reverse order to your comments. The Chinese assertiveness toward the region, including the construction of large artificial islands in Southeast Asia in disputed areas, came at the expense of some of the regional actors long before President Trump ever took office. And there was a reaction in the United States to this increased Chinese assertiveness toward the region. And I look at a country like the Philippines, and I don't think that the Philippines security officials and top officials would agree with your portrayal of the problems that they face. They have serious sovereignty disputes with China, and every single day, Chinese Coast Guard ships, maritime militia with Navy over the horizon are putting pressure on what they see as their rightful claims. What the International Tribunal before the Trump administration ruled was rightfully their areas. So I don't think this is all an American imagination, and I don't think that regional actors who are concerned about China's assertive behavior toward them are somehow delusional about the importance of the U.S. role in the region. And what I would say is the U.S. does, I tried to suggest to you, sir, that the U.S. does unfortunately sometimes press these actors to say choose, which I think is too simplistic of an approach. None of these actors want to choose. As I said, Jonathan Stromseth, with whom I worked at the State Department as an advisor, he understood that. That's not a good approach, and we often do that when we're in this kind of competition. But the only thing that'd be worse than the United States going there and saying choose is for the United States to disappear. And I think you'll discover pretty quickly that the source of the problem is not really the United States being present in East Asia if the United States were to pull out and not assert influence in places like the South China Sea. I think that would be much worse for the Southeast Asian states. In terms of the investment, I agree with you. It's a strong feeling in the United States. It's a strong feeling that's been fed by many elites on the left and the right that globalization has been bad for America. I'm just not of that camp. I have an article out. I'm not going to explain my thesis in that article, but I have an article in World Politics in which I argue that not only has globalization been good for the global economy, but it's been good for U.S. national security. There has not been a war in East Asia since 1979. And I believe that one of the strong reasons there hasn't been a war in East Asia since 1979 is the tightly integrated economies, the transnational production chain that everybody knows is very productive and very fragile, and therefore war is not a good idea. If we unravel that through tariffs and trade wars, we're not only going to miss the economic benefits of the globalization, we're going to increase the likelihood of conflict in your region, which I think would be tragedy for everybody.
Okay, well, it looks like we have the title for the next conference here on economics. I would like to invite each of the speakers to give a closing remark or comment to a question or issue that was raised, if they would so like to do that.
I'd just like to say one thing, that strategic competition with China doesn't mean war with China, and it doesn't need to be zero-sum. If it's managed well, it doesn't have to be zero-sum, but it's real. It's going to exist. It's going to exist for decades. And if the U.S. does one of two things, it would be a tragedy for East Asia. One would be to cede the power to China in the region and pull out. The second would be to mishandle the strategic competition and lead to an otherwise avoidable conflict. So in Chinese, it's 中庸之道. You have to find that middle ground position where you're active, you're competing, and you're recognizing that it's not necessarily going to be a war. And that's a tough thing for democracies to do.
And this administration in particular?
I don't know about this administration in particular, because I honestly don't know where they're headed. And when people ask me to analyze where the Trump administration is heading, I say, I can't tell. I can tell you that what intellectual trends are within the administration, but I don't know which one will win. And I don't know if the president has decided where he's going to go. And if the president doesn't know where he's going to go, how can I know? Right?
Mhm.
And I'm not the president. So all sorts of reasons I'm not the president. Right?
Okay. Ayumi, do you have a last minute comment? Since, as we all know, Japan is the most trusted partner country in Southeast Asia.
Yeah, I think just piggyback on what Ambassador Mitchell was saying about the trust. Trust is very difficult to establish, and once you establish, you don't want to let that go. One of the reasons that Southeast Asia countries seem to like Japan's investment is that they come on time, they are delivered on time, and promised as they were promised. And that doesn't happen with Chinese aid. And again, with the U.S. going back and forth on where it wants to be in Southeast Asia, it's really disruptive. So I think Japan will just continue to engage with Southeast Asia. It has always engaged with Southeast Asia. But I think we also have to recognize that the goal for Southeast Asia or U.S. strategy in Southeast Asia should not be to dominate Southeast Asia. It's really to embrace the multilateralism in Southeast Asia and to deny the dominant China, any country to dominate that region. And I think we have many, many actors that are wealthy enough now to deny that kind of monopoly of influence over Southeast Asia. So I'm a little more optimistic because I think Southeast Asian countries have a lot more agency and many other U.S. allies are interested in engaging in that region. But again, I cannot dismiss the adverse impact of U.S. being so unpredictable and not credible. Thank you.
And I just want to follow up. Ayumi made the point that Southeast Asia is really multipolar. Some of you were here in the fall when we had Tom Parks, the executive vice president of the Asia Foundation, give a book talk on his fascinating new book, Southeast Asia's Multipolar Future, in which he makes and supports that argument. And I would certainly recommend that to everybody here. All right, Derek, you get the last word.
Well, much of what has been said, and there's a lot more to be said today, I think, to get to more granularity on these points. I mean, the question will be how I take Yumi's point entirely. Southeast Asia has agency itself, and Southeast Asia is not a singular, entity. There are individual countries that will make individual decisions. What will be interesting to see is whether this pulls them together, which has been quite divided, or they will separate according to their individual interests. Because Southeast Asia as a whole, the American policy for a long time has been preventing the rise of a regional hegemon, a single regional hegemon, whether that's China or Soviet Union, whatever it is in the old days. So, but now, there's a lot of confusion, a lot of questions. And I think the region is going to be caught between the kind of Scylla and Charybdis of either, you have to choose between US and China, or the US and China are going to work together on a G2 with this tariff thing hanging over the region and affecting economies and affecting that predictability, that sustainability, that stability of the region. It's going to be a challenging time. So this idea of keeping your head down, staying out of the light is the best you can try to do, but it's going to be very difficult. I think things are going to turn eventually. Things are going to wash onto your shores, whether you like it or not. And the decisions that individual countries make, both individually and collectively, pulling together, whether it becomes regionalized because you can't trust the West, the United States. I don't know. That's not also unpredictable. So, I think the United States, aside from Trump, views China as the problem. They're going to focus on the China challenge. That's the prediction. I think it's mostly that's where it's going to be focused. But this big question of the Trump card, as it were, coming in and saying, I want to avoid that. I couldn't think of another term, but coming in and just really blowing it all up, that you can't predict. But the rest of it, you can kind of see the trends. And I think it's time for the region. I'm interested to hear from the region what you all are thinking of what you do in response to where those trends seem to be headed.
All right. Well, everybody, I think you can agree we've had an excellent panel here. We've exchanged a wide variety of views, and we have set the stage for the following panels that'll discuss Southeast Asia's perspectives and prospects for U.S. ties. So please join me in thanking our panelists.
Thank you all for coming to Columbia.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it. We appreciate it more than ever.
Yeah.